Okay, welcome back. I'd like to thank everybody one last time during the day for our presenters, our co-sponsors, for the people that have helped us to put this collaborative work together. Before we begin, I'd like to just say a word about the fact that we have stone soup. I mean, I was just thinking about this when we had Sheila and Dan and Nate and all these wonderful people who have been working together, is that it is stone soup. If anybody knows the stone soup, it's a story about 3 soldiers who go out and they're hungry and they come to a town and they see a bunch of people who say, oh, we have nothing for you, we have nothing for you. So they put a stone in a kettle, and all these people, all these townspeople start coming out and they say, what are you doing? And they say, oh, we're making stone soup. And they said, would you like to try it? And they hand off a spoon to the person and they say, oh, you know, oh, this is okay, but you know, it could use some celery. So somebody runs off and they get celery. And everybody agrees it's much better, you know, and somebody says, but you know what this could use? This could use some onions. So another person runs off and get onions. And that's how the story progresses until finally they have a fantastic soup, and everybody says this is the best soup we've ever had. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the last of our sessions for today. And unfortunately, Julia Peters couldn't make it. Chris McDonough will be standing in for her. Chris will explain to you why Julia couldn't make it today. And Chris, when you are ready, we will begin our last session. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our last session. I'm very sorry Julia Peter can't be here. I have worked with Julia in DC and actually in Iowa and New Hampshire doing bird dogging. This is a very active group, the Center for Popular Democracy. They're just a wonderful group. They're doing the work. And I thought what I would do is I would read the email that I got from Julia. They were planning on being here, but what happened was, excuse me, sorry, forgive my reach. But when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died, their work started. So it's, hi, I'm very sorry that unfortunately CPD and Demand Justice are not able to be on for Democracy on Fire. We are 24/7 in this SCOTUS fight. Excuse me, sorry, something popped up. I wasn't really ready for this. However, we recorded this video just days ago with the most up-to-date information we have. And we were joined by Chris Kang of Demand Justice, co-founder and chief counsel. He worked under Obama on judicial, I'm sorry, it's going slow, nominees, and is a well-known expert on the subject. I hope that you are able to play this recording in my place. So this is current work that they're doing. They have been outside the Supreme Court ever since Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away. They organized the vigil that was going on there that very night that she died. And I would like you to see it. It's what's going on in the Supreme Court, and I don't think you're going to be seeing a lot of this on the news. So without further ado, I will cue up that video.
Thank you, Chris, for doing this on short notice.
Okay, there we go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Please know that this is being recorded.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Peter. I use she, her pronouns, and I work for the Center for Popular Democracy. and CPD Action. At CPD, we care about the courts because we care about the ACA, about immigrants, the environment, workers' justice, racial justice, and
Did other people lose sound? I'm not hearing the
joined
video.
by Chief Counsel and Co-founder Chris Kang, and also organizing director
I apologize. I will rewind it and start it
Robert
over.
Scott. So I'll pass it over to you, Chris.
Sorry, that was a technical fault on my end.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Please know that this is being recorded.
Everyone, my name is Julia Peter. I use she, her pronouns, and I work for the Center for Popular Democracy and CPD Action. At CPD, we care about the courts because we care about the ACA, about immigrants, the environment, workers' justice, racial justice, and so on, all of our progressive issues. And this is why we care about this courts. In this training, we're trying our best to give you what I think you came for. We're going to try to outline what's currently happening with this vacancy. We're going to make a plea to all of you to join in this fight with us and tell you exactly how to plug into this work. But before I start going on and on, I want to introduce our co-hosts at Demand Justice. We're so lucky to be in this fight with Demand Justice, an organization solely focused on saving our federal judiciary. Today, we're joined by Chief Counsel and Co-founder Chris Kang, and also organizing director Robert Scott. So I'll pass it over to you, Chris.
Thanks so much, Julia. My name is Chris. I use pronouns he, him. And I'm really honored and privileged to have this conversation with you. It's a bit of a different conversation and training than we thought it would be a week ago. And I thought it would be important to just take a moment and sort of reflect on this moment we're in, and really on the life and legacy of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Just to take a moment and reflect on the fact that she was a pioneer and really a champion for equality. And I think a lot of people compare her work to that of Thurgood Marshall, who opened doors for African Americans and people of color in this country, but she herself didn't. She recognized her own privilege. And so I think it's sort of an important grounding for us to really understand just how important the work she did was, sort of how she sees herself in this world, and really how important she's been to preserving our democracy and the rights and equality of all people. So I do just want to take a quick moment to pause and allow folks to reflect on that. You know, I think that over the last week, we've had a chance through vigils and through there's a People's Memorial, where those who've been able to come to Washington, D.C. to really take more time to reflect on Justice Ginsburg's legacy. And quite honestly, I'm kind of mad that we don't have more time to do that. This should be a time where we're really reflecting on a woman who is an American hero. The woman right now, Justice Ginsburg, is the first woman to lie in state in the U.S. Capitol. And that is appalling on so many levels that she's the first, and also sort of appropriate given the doors that she's opened for women throughout this country. And this should be a time of sort of uninterrupted reflection and celebration and mourning. And especially for those in the Jewish community, as the first Jewish Supreme Court justice, she meant so much. And to have this come during the high holidays, I think has been especially both meaningful and difficult. And yet here we are having this conversation about Republicans' attempt to fill this Supreme Court vacancy. And that's really what I want to sort of open this conversation with today. I was just realizing this today, this is my 8th Supreme Court nomination fight. I've sort of done these through the, when I was in the Senate, I did these when I was in the White House. I've done a handful of these now from being on the outside. And really this moment that we're in and being in partnership and allyship with all of you is so important. And so I really wanted to take a little bit of time to situate ourselves into this particular moment, sort of the importance of the Supreme Court, the fight to come, the fight that we're already in the middle of. Again, it's been not even a week since Justice Ginsburg passed away, and she won't even be buried until next week. And yet here we are talking about the substantive and political consequences that are to come from this vacancy. But I really do appreciate this chance to talk to all of you, knowing and having experienced firsthand, somewhat during the Gorsuch fight, but in particular the Kavanaugh fight, being side by side with all of you in the streets, on the phones, in senators' faces, demanding justice. And so with that, wanted to just talk a little bit about this moment we're in. You know, I think one of the challenges that we have on the Supreme Court is that there's a lot of progressives, a lot of Democrats sort of think of the Supreme Court and they think about cases like Roe versus Wade and Brown versus Board of Education, cases that have really stood to open doors and expand justice and equality. And at the end of the day, that's what our courts should do. The courts are there to protect our democracy, to protect our rights, and to expand justice and equality for all people. And that's the kind of court we'd like to see. And that's the kind of court that we aspire to. And I think one of the challenges sometimes for us is recognizing that that's unfortunately not the court that we have, right? We don't have an apolitical court. This is not the court that some of us may have learned about in elementary school or in social studies class about a third co-equal branch of government and checks and balances. That's gone now, right? This Supreme Court is dominated by a right-wing partisan majority, and our rights and our democracy are at risk. And so we've seen this sort of time and time again, where starting from, and I think it's actually important to reflect back, especially these days, really on Bush v. Gore and the Supreme Court handing that election to George W. Bush, and then time and time again undermining our democracy, whether it's overturning campaign finance regulations in Citizens United, striking down parts of the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County versus Holder, allowing partisan gerrymandering, kicking people off the voting rolls, making it harder to unionize. Just this summer, time after time, in these 5-4 partisan decisions, these Republican Supreme Court justices have made it harder to vote. They've made it harder to vote in Wisconsin, in Alabama, in Texas, and in Florida. And this is the court that we have. This is the moment that we're in, where I think that progressives are really starting to understand what's at stake with our court and really the institution that we have and why it needs to be reformed. I think that we've spent a long time, Democrats being afraid to talk about the courts and afraid to talk about the Supreme Court fights, because there's this sense, and I think it was the reality for a long time, that Republicans cared more about the courts than we do. But that's not the case. That hasn't been the case, certainly since the Brett Kavanaugh fight really has sparked a lot of the activism around the courts. But really nationwide, we saw, even before last week, poll after poll showing that Democrats care more about the court and sort of see the Supreme Court as a very important issue than Republicans do. And I think that it's against that backdrop that we sort of have this moment today, in which we'll be talking about sort of where we are and how Republicans are going to try to push through this nomination. So what we have here now is, again, it's hard to overstate just how unprecedented all of this is. Again, this is my 8th fight, and I haven't seen anything even close to like it. Right? We're sort of hit with the sudden opening on the Supreme Court and the tragic death of Justice Ginsburg, and now 7 days later, President Trump is going to announce his nominee for the Supreme Court. So he has decided that tomorrow at 5 p.m. he's going to announce who he's going to pick. We'll sort of get into who he might pick and what a little bit about their records. But I just want to take a step back and think about the process we are now less than 40 days away from the election. The Supreme Court nominee has not been confirmed this quickly in a long time, certainly not in modern times. Maybe if you go back, 40, 50, 80 years perhaps, but we're in a very different time. And the consequences of these Supreme Court vacancies is so much higher that it requires more scrutiny. It requires more examination. It requires more opportunity for the public to really understand what's at stake and who these nominees are and what the impact is that they're going to have on our lives for decades, literally 30, 40 years impact on our lives. And yet Republicans are looking to ram this nomination through before the election. And so from a very top line messaging point, a top line goal, the outcome that we would like to see and what we're calling for is no confirmation until inauguration. Votes are already being cast. They sort of say we're less than 40 days until election day, but many of us have already voted, depending on where you live. We're going to be voting in person or absentee already. The votes are being counted, and so it's not appropriate then for somebody who may be voted out of office within weeks to decide the future of our country for the next 40 years. And so to the extent that we sort of look at where the dynamics are and how this is playing out, though, if you read the papers, I guess nobody else reads the papers, if you read Twitter, it's very clear Mitch McConnell's plan here is to try to declare victory, to say he has all of the votes he needs, and to have this just be a very quick march to confirmation by Halloween is the timeline that Republicans are setting out, and sort of try to deflate the energy, try to deflate the activism, and make us feel defeated. But there absolutely is a path to success here, and I think it's that we have to sort of hold on to and sort of figure out how it is we get from here to there. Right. And so in terms of the timeline and thinking about how we're going to look at this fight and sketch it out, because now until January 20th is a long time and there's going to be a lot of steps in between, the very first step here is we have to push this vote past the election. We have to let the voters decide. The will of the people needs to be heard, and then we'll see where the timeline is and the results of the election. After that, the next milestone date that we're going to be aiming toward is November 30th. If Mark Kelly were to win the open seat in Arizona, he would be seated as early as November 30th, which then changes the margin from a 53-47 Republican majority to 52-48. And then the next step is to wait till get to the end of the year. And, depending on the outcome of the election on January 3rd, it could be a Democratic Senate. And then clearly they would not allow consideration of the Trump Supreme Court nominee. And so when we think about the steps and the timing involved, we're sort of taking this piece by piece. And the first piece is, how do we get from here to election day? And really the flip side of this is, what are Republicans doing that they're trying so hard to get this done by election day? And what Republicans are really trying to do is, they know that this is an incredibly unpopular process. The hypocrisy of filling a Supreme Court vacancy today, just weeks before an election, when they stole a seat from President Obama and left it open for 8 months. And then the consequences of this extreme nominee herself and her record, and then the stakes involved. And the stakes, we'll get to this again, are that the Affordable Care Act and access to abortion and gun violence prevention measures and climate change are on the line. Republicans know that if we have a real airing of all of these things, they're going to lose. The public sentiment's so far against them that the best choice they have is to ram it through as quickly as possible. So how do they do that? The next step in the process here is that President Trump announced a nomination tomorrow, and then Senator Graham, maybe even tomorrow night, Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina, as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the schedule of the committee is up to him. And he has suggested that he's going to have a hearing as soon as October 13th, which is the day after Indigenous Peoples Day. And that would be wildly unprecedented, to have a hearing just 17 days after nomination, where the last 10 nominees since 1990, or last 10 Supreme Court justices since 1990, had a hearing an average of 50 days after nomination. And again, Republicans denied Merrick Garland a hearing for 8 months. And so they're trying to press the schedule as quickly as possible. And so during the 2-week time now between Saturday and October 13, we would expect the nominee to meet with senators and to do courtesy meetings and try to give this the appearance of a nomination as usual. And so what we'll be asking as many senators as we can to not have those courtesy meetings. There's nothing courteous about this process. We really have to show that this is an illegitimate process from the very beginning. And so denying courtesy meetings, raising hell about the hearing schedule, how unfair it is to expect senators to consider a Supreme Court nominee and her record in just weeks. Throughout the entire, at least the last 12 years, and probably much further, no judge has been considered in less than 28 days from nomination to a Judiciary Committee hearing. Not a single one for a single federal court, even the very entry level. These are all lifetime appointments. There used to be an understanding that that meant something, that meant due deliberation and consideration. And yet here we are ramming this all into 17 days so that they can have this confirmation by election day. And so what we're trying to do is make sure that we understand we're actually in a much better position now than we've ever been before. And so while Mitch McConnell is out there trying to project strength, that he has the votes, the reality is he doesn't. It's much easier to issue a tweet or a press release before the people have been heard, and poll after poll after poll shows that the American people do not believe this is legitimate and that the process should wait. We also already have 2 Republican senators who said that they're going to vote no on any vote before an election. So now it's up to us to try to either convince 2 more senators, Republicans, to join them, or, and I think this is important, create enough of an outrage amongst everywhere so that Republican senators understand that there's going to be accountability, that there's going to be a backlash. And for some of them, it's going to be in their best interest to not have this vote before the hearing or before the election. And so even if there are senators out there who've already made their position clear, I think for me, the most resonant parallel here is the Affordable Care Act. This is the fight that I know that so many of you have been in before and won. And Mitch McConnell thought he had the votes until he didn't. And it's that the reason he didn't is because of the activism, the energy, the storytelling, the impact on real people that really drove it home. And so that's the kind of thing that we're looking to replicate here in order to bring this fight home. So with that, I do want to talk a little bit about where we are in the process here and the short list of nominees that President Trump is likely to consider. Ironically, just a few weeks ago, he announced a bunch of additions to his short list. So now he theoretically has 43 people to pick from. And I really think that most of them are not household names, but several of them are. And I really think that it exemplifies who all 43 of these people are. These are partisan political hacks like Senators Ted Cruz and Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley, people who've been very clear that they want to overturn Roe versus Wade and strike down the Affordable Care Act. I think the other appalling thing about all of this is that the only African-American lawyer on Trump's list is a 38-year-old from Kentucky who's only been practicing law for a handful of years, and is the Kentucky Attorney General. And what is he best known for? He's best known for not bringing justice for the killers of Breonna Taylor. And to have those sham grand jury charges earlier this week that I know that so many of us are still processing and grappling with and seeking justice, for that man to be on this short list speaks volumes about how these nominees are going to approach not just the ACA, not just Roe versus Wade or immigrant rights, but racial justice. And to have somebody like that in this moment it's beyond a slap in the face. And I think that we need to understand that even though the nominee won't literally be Daniel Cameron, it's going to be somebody who shares his views. It's going to be somebody who shares his outlook. Same with Ted Cruz, same with Tom Cotton. And the idea, just because the people that we'll talk about here in a moment are not household names, doesn't mean that they don't share the values and the extreme beliefs that the household name people do. So I did want to touch on the people who we do think are the two sort of most likely candidates to come out of President Trump's nomination tomorrow. The first is Amy Coney Barrett. She is currently a judge in Indiana. And I would just note that this is part of a long-standing Republican plan that President Obama, there was a judicial opening, this very same judicial opening that she sits in now, was open in 2015 and 16, and President Obama nominated Myra Selby. She's probably a name we'll be hearing more of in the coming days if Amy Coney Barrett is nominated. Myra Selby was an Indiana Supreme Court justice. She was the first African-American, first woman to sit on the Indiana Supreme Court, and President Obama nominated her to this seat on the 7th Circuit, so it's at the level just below the Supreme Court, and Republicans blocked her. Mitch McConnell blocked her, the Republican home state blocked her, and they held the seat open for Amy Coney Barrett. And so you know that she is somebody with an extreme record that they have been grooming for a long time. She is a protege of Antonin Scalia, who is one of the most extreme Supreme Court justices. She clerked for him. And so I also think that in this moment, and I know that some of you were able to join the presentation by She Will Rise, a campaign to seat the first Black woman Supreme Court justice, I find it appalling that once again, Amy Coney Barrett might be in position to take away another seat that we believe should go to a Black woman. Because this moment that we're in, that instead they're going to put this woman forward. And why do they like her so much? They like her because she's been very clear that she will overturn Roe versus Wade. She has been outspoken that the Affordable Care Act should be struck down. As many of you know, the Supreme Court has already considered the Affordable Care Act twice, and twice it's been upheld by a 5-4 vote. Now, one of those votes was Justice Ginsburg. So now we have to see who's going to be the 5th vote. It's going to be this nominee that President Trump puts forward tomorrow. And Amy Coney Barrett both times said she thought the losing argument was the better one. So we know what her position is when it comes to the Affordable Care Act, and we know what her position is when it comes to access to abortion. She also has bad rulings with respect to gun violence prevention and to immigration rights. And so she is going to be an incredibly extreme nominee who, if she's able to take the court, will serve for the next 30 or 40 years. The other nominee that's been floated out there a lot is Barbara Lagoa. She is a judge on the 11th Circuit. Her biggest claim to fame is that she recently was part of this decision that made it harder for as many as 85,000 Floridians to vote. The people formerly incarcerated Floridians, where the voters again decided that they should have their voting rights restored, and then the Florida governor and legislature have tried to take it away. Barbara Lagoa was okay with that. She is somebody who also has a record that is extremely anti-abortion, and her record on voting rights and on workers' rights is also very bad. And we know that she's going to strike down the Affordable Care Act. I think that as we think about the messages that we need to bring forward in this fight, in this moment, we have the hypocrisy is clear. The fact that Republicans stole a seat from President Obama and said that he couldn't fill a seat because it was the last year of his presidency, and now we're filling a seat for President Trump in the last weeks of his presidency is appalling. But really, the bigger picture is this. The bigger picture is that Senate Republicans refuse to do anything to help the millions of Americans who are struggling because of the COVID pandemic. They're struggling because of the economy, because they've lost their jobs, they've lost their access to health care. They're struggling because schools can't be open. We're struggling because of the effects of the disease itself. Republicans refuse time after time to do any work, to seek any compromise to help the American people. And yet now, in the closing days of this session, they're going to ram through a Supreme Court nominee. So the misplaced priorities and the refusal of Senate Republicans to consider the pressing needs, and I will also add, especially in this moment, especially this week, the need for police reform, which this Republican Senate has given at best lip service to, is appalling. Those are the real issues of the day, not trying to take over the Supreme Court with the partisan power grab. And why are they doing it? Again, we have to bring this back to the stakes of what's here. And that is, in particular, access to health care. The Affordable Care Act is going to be before the Supreme Court again next week, or the week after the election. It's going to be heard before the Supreme Court. So Republicans are trying to push this seat to be filled so that this justice can be that fifth vote to strike down the Affordable Care Act. And also access to abortion. Access to abortion and striking down gun violence prevention are the other two big motivating issues on the right, because they're trying to use the courts to do things that they couldn't otherwise do. And this is a huge fight ahead of us. I'm going to turn it over to Robert to sort of talk about the bigger picture and how we got here, because while this is the biggest fight we're going to have, it's important to realize all of the fights that have gotten us to this point and why it's really necessary to build on this so that we can really be in a much better position, an even better position moving forward. So thanks so much for having me.
Thank you, Chris. A lot to digest, a lot at stake, a lot happening here. But as Chris mentioned, we are going to dive into a little bit more of the context and the history of the court here. And the reality is that either Amy Coney Barrett or Barbara Lagoa, any nominee for that matter that Trump is going to get confirmed, is going to be joining an already divided political and partisan Supreme Court. So quickly, we're going to go and take a look at who it is that they would be joining. These are the justices on the bench from the last term that ended in June of this year. The Supreme Court's made up of 9 seats, and with passing of RBG, we now have 8 justices and an open seat. There's nothing special about the number 9, just as an FYI. It has been changed a few times over the course of the United States history, including the year that McConnell held open the vacant seat and denied Merrick Garland a hearing. These justices, again, are nominated by the president, but they have to be approved by the Senate. And as Chris mentioned, once they are approved, they are there for lifetime appointments. We don't see the justices very often because cameras and phones aren't allowed in hearing rooms. But this is a court that, as been mentioned, is dominated by Republican justices. Of the 8 that are there, 3 judges currently sitting are considered to be more liberal on the court. Those justices are Sonia Sotomayor, who was the first Latina on the court. She was appointed by Obama. She's one of, if not the most progressive on the court now. Also on the court is Justice Breyer, who was nominated by Clinton, and Justice Kagan, who was also nominated by Obama, but both of them are former liberal. Some of you might recognize Chief Justice Roberts. He is a hyper-conservative appointed by George W. Bush. He is known best for overseeing the Trump impeachment trial, notable due to its lack of witness testimony. In the wild world that we all now live in, he is actually considered to be the swing vote on the Republican-dominated bench, even though he has overseen some just awful partisan decisions, particularly when it comes to voting rights. The rest of the partisan political majority is filled out by Clarence Thomas, who some of you might recognize. He was accused of sexual assault at his confirmation hearing to the Supreme Court. And his wife has really, really close ties to the Trump administration. We also have Samuel Alito, who is just a strong clinical conservative. And then we also have Trump's first 2 picks to the Supreme Court. We have Neil Gorsuch, who sits in Merrick Garland's stolen seat. And we have Brett Kavanaugh, who at the time of his confirmation had 83 ethics complaints against him, including credible sexual assault allegations. Now, it's disturbing to think of the power that these men have, but it's important to know. And now that we know a little bit about who they are, let's look at what and the damage that this Republican bloc has done over the course of the last decade. There's a lot to cover, but we are going to point out some of the very clear trends that we have seen watching this court operate over the last 10 years. We see 5 unelected men serving lifetime appointments, voting together in a bloc to limit the rights and freedoms of over 300 million Americans. cases involving gerrymandering, voter ID laws, purging of the voter rolls, and restricting early vote access. And very importantly, delivering time after time for Donald Trump. Instead of checking his abuse of powers, they protect him and his agenda, be it the border wall, the ban on transgender service members, the Muslim ban, or even his tax returns. If we had more time, and I want to be conscious of the amount of time that we have, we would talk about the fact that he's firing directors at independent agencies and ignoring subpoenas from Congress. But one thing is just very, very crystal clear, and that is that the Republican bloc are far too partisan and too political, and we can definitely not trust them to be impartial. They have opened the floodgates for billionaires and for corporations to try and buy elections. Some would argue succeed in buying elections. They've overturned key parts of the Voting Rights Act, right? This is actually a passion project for John Roberts, who had worked on restricting voting rights from his time during the Reagan administration. This isn't a new fascination for him. He's been at this for decades. More recently, this court has forced people to choose between their right to vote and their safety in Wisconsin. In the middle of a pandemic, they upheld, and in Florida, Chris mentioned this, but upholding what amounted to a poll tax for returning citizens in Florida. And it's just, it is time and time again, we see this happening over and over, particularly when it comes to voting rights. The Republican appointed justices are tilting the law in favor of the rich and the already powerful and against everyone else. They're making it harder for people working in the public sector to work with a union, and there could be even more decisions to come with a further stacked court. They made it easier for companies to kick consumers out of court with forced arbitration. This court has sided with banks and changed the structure of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. Like, there is literally no end to the work that they have done. And this is only some key inflection points. I would call them highlights, but they're actually lowlights. And the very frustrating thing is that the Supreme Court, the justices on the Supreme Court, are exempt from a code of ethics. They're almost untouchable during their lifetime appointment. In order to impeach, you have to hit the same threshold as it would take to impeach a president. So it's very difficult to hold these folks accountable. And again, I just want to remind you, these justices aren't chosen by the people right now. They aren't elected, and there isn't an opportunity to hold them accountable. A perfect example in all of this is Brett Kavanaugh, who, as I mentioned earlier, he had 83 ethics complaints. 83 ethics complaints, active investigations against him about sexual assaults, committing perjury, his partisan bias, and his time in the Bush White House. All of those had to be dropped the moment that he took his seat on the Supreme Court. He is extremely unpopular, but he is protected by his position. And that just, frankly, shouldn't be the case. Republicans have worked for a very long time to take over the Supreme Court and to develop a bench of candidates that will do as they ask, both at potential nominees for the Supreme Court have been and are currently serving as circuit court judges. And they owe their positions to Donald Trump and to Mitch McConnell. Amy Coney Barrett has been a judge for 3 years on the circuit court, and Barbara Lagoa for just over a year. And a huge part of the takeover strategy, it is the circuit courts, both from a bench perspective in finding and future Supreme Court picks, and for legal challenges. The circuit courts, for context, hear about 50,000 cases a year from across the country and serve as a gateway to the Supreme Court. For context, the Supreme Court only hears about 100 cases a year. So the legal challenges and the legal implications of the circuit court are far-reaching and wide. Also of note, Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, have been confirming judges at a historic pace. Obama, in his 8 years, nominated and confirmed 55 circuit court judges. Donald Trump has been able to do 52 in less than 4, and he's on the path of confirming even more. And it was just last week that they confirmed another federal judge. But I think it's important that we don't just talk about this in a theoretic. I want to take a look at who these judges are. And if you look at the circuit court judges that have been nominated and confirmed in the last 3 years during the Trump administration, they are overwhelmingly young. They are going to serve for decades. They are ultra conservative and partisan. They're men. They are 88% of them are men. 84% of them are white. And Trump has been going around boasting that he has appointed over a quarter of the nation's circuit court judges. Additionally, 43 of the judges have ties to the Federalist Society, which is a group that once upon a time was thought to have some fringe ideas, but they are still finding a home in the Trump administration and being able to turn their fringe ideas into more mainstream and promoting their preferred candidates onto their list. And like I said, McConnell is still hard at work packing the lower courts as well as the Supreme Court. And I want to point out that 7 of these folks, when we talk about hyperpartisan and overtly political, 7 of these folks work for Trump directly, either on his campaign or within the administration. So they are not what you would call judicial here. Also, you might have seen some reports that McConnell was calling around and asking folks to retire, judges to retire, so that he could replace them with his young and hyper-conservative judges. Well, this is a long-term plan that they have had for a very, very long time. This is part of the strategy that they put together for decades in order to accomplish this, and they continue to do this in the middle of a pandemic. So all of these all of these circuit court judges are one day hoping to land a seat on their Supreme Court, and in doing that, they have said some absolutely wild things as kind of a tryout for the Republican kingmakers here.
Thanks, Robert. So we're going to take a look at some of the things these judges are saying before we dive in. Every trigger warning imaginable. These quotes are racist, they're transphobic, xenophobic, homophobic, truly all of the worst things. I also want to point out that we pulled these quotes from legal briefs and law journals. So this isn't just like a late night Twitter rant or some recording from, a fundraiser. These are things that they think qualify to be put into legal briefs. Also, as Robert mentioned, these judges are young. They're asking older judges to retire and placing them with very, very young judges. So I don't believe in the excuse, I said that decades ago, it was a different time, but they can't even pull on that. These are unfortunately really, really recent quotes as well. And you'll see there's some trends. They're going to talk a lot about being against the ACA, Roe v. Wade, LGBTQ+ rights, and just blatantly racist. So we'll start here with Naomi Rao, who actually took KAVANAUGH's seat on the DC Circuit Court. We teamed up with Demand Justice to try to block her confirmation. She's very terrifying person. It was hard to pick which quote from her to pull, but I'll just read a fraction here. Women believe falsely that they should be able to go anywhere with anyone. Rape apology will be another kind of theme here. And this person now sits on, what's, commonly considered the second highest court in the country. We'll take a look now. We pulled some quotes from Coney Barrett, who we talked about earlier, who might be announced Saturday as Trump's nominee. Here she says that Roe v. Wade was an erroneous decision, and that the ACA's birth control benefit is an assault on religious liberty. So we know she's happy with the decision from the last term. Stephen Menashe is someone that CPD and Demand Justice also teamed up to try to block. He has tons of terribly racist writings. Also a rape apologist. He wrote in a legal journal that he thinks women complain too much about sexual assault. We were able to interrupt his hearing by blowing brake whistles and taking over the hallways outside. We also talked to just dozens of senators about his confirmation. Unfortunately, he was confirmed. Here he is with a, saying, comparing colleges, asking about race on applications to Nuremberg laws. It's so important, to focus on the circuit court judge because, like we said, they're going to shape the laws in this country for decades, 30 to 40 years. Regardless of what happens in November, these folks are going to be on the courts for a long time to come. But also, they're all potentially Kavanaugh 2.0. Thought a lot about in the Kavanaugh fight, if we could have prevented him from being on the DC Circuit Court, we never would be in the fight to prevent him from being on SCOTUS. So this is where we are potentially today with Amy Coney Barrett. Sarah Picklet, someone that made the news a lot at the end of last year, saying terrible things about surrogacy, a way that hundreds of thousands of people in this country are able to become parents. We'll end here with some really disgusting quotes, very transphobic, calling transgender a delusion and saying that it was a grave mistake to include protections for LGBTQ+ people in the Violence Against Women Act. Honestly, these are just a small sampling. There are some that I just felt were too offensive to even throw up on slides. We do this, not just to scare you, but really just to hammer home. It would be bad enough if the courts just flip conservative, but these aren't even normal conservative judges. Their beliefs are totally extreme, and they're also mostly very unqualified. So, you might be asking, how did we get here? How did these absolutely wild candidates end up in such high positions of power? And it was a very coordinated 30-year+ effort to, meet these goals and just take over our courts. It really starts in the 70s and the 80s with big business and corporate greed. They were greedy and wanting to write their own rules to rig the game. They wanted to make sure the referees were in their pockets. So there were loads of organizations that were created really as vehicles. Three of the big ones here are the Heritage Foundation, which is a think tank that, among many things that have their terrible views, thinks climate change is not real. There's the Judicial Crisis Network that just spends tons of money on these nominations. They spent $10 million to ensure Kavanaugh's confirmation. Don't know the dollar amount this time around, but we can assume it's a huge chunk. And then, of course, the Federalist Society, which were once thought to have fringe ideas, but have been able to make themselves a really powerful force in our judiciary. Talk a little bit more about the Federalist Society. They call themselves a debate club. They start with law students. And they say they're a group of people interested in the current state of the legal order. They also say their goals are reordering the legal system, putting a premium on traditional values. We know what that means. In reality, they have strong ties to conservative dark money, and they use that money to normalize their very fringe ideas. They give input to judges in every GOP candidate since Reagan, and right now with Trump's really just giving it the rubber stamp. Is he the mastermind behind all of this? Of course not. The Federalist Society is giving him a list of judges, and he's pulling from that list. Both Amy Coney Barrett and Barbara Lagoa have, many, many ties to the Federalist Society. Like I said, they, recruit students at law schools, promise them, long careers in judgeships. Fun fact or not so fun fact, all 5 Republican justices currently on the Supreme Court also have ties to this Federalist Society. It's just, they've reached really unprecedented peaks of power. Like I said, they provide the short list, it's getting rubber stamped, and they just have an enormous amount of say in who, unfortunately, our next Supreme Court justice might be. And the same type of folks, who donate to the Federalist Society are donating to the Heritage Foundation, Judicial Crisis Network, Mitch McConnell, and so on. And it's an enormous amount of money, just like hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. So it really will take a lot of organizing and a lot of people power to be able to fight back against these really huge institutions. On that note, we'll just take a minute and talk about some of the organizing we've done and highlight one action that we did against the Federalist Society. Every year in DC, they have a big fancy fundraiser, and we found out this past winter that KAVANAUGH was going to be the keynote speaker. So of course, CPD and Demand Justice knew that we had to be there. We had a giant screen with video and audio playing Dr. Ford's testimony on repeat. Attendees, it took them over an hour to get into the event, and so they had to stand directly in front of this screen and be faced with Dr. Ford's words the entire time. We had folks dress up like maybe they were working the event and pass out fake programs, and on the front had the Federalist Society crest. But on the inside, all of the examples of Kavanaugh perjuring himself during the hearings, and on the back, some information on how to impeach a Supreme Court justice. Two of our all-star bird doggers rented a gown and tux and were actually able to get into the event. When Kavanaugh went to speak and give his keynote, they stood up and proclaimed that they still believe Anita Hill, they still believe Dr. Ford, and they blew rape whistles until they were ushered out of the room. But then we had 30 or so more people directly behind the curtain and the stage follow up and continue to blow rape whistles and overcome this speech and cause a lot of disruption. We also had folks show up dressed and just kind of another, just a circus kind of going on. So we did this, I mean, to be honest, it was a bit cathartic and fun, but more than that, we did it because we're trying to shine a light on the Federalist Society. They're doing so much work transforming our judiciary, and so many people have never even heard of them. The year before, their dinner got a couple of press hits, like a paragraph in the Washington Post, but after we showed up, there were just dozens and dozens of articles. We were in, traditional news, New York Times and whatever, but we were also in Teen Vogue, we were in BuzzFeed, we were trending on Twitter. Some of our videos had millions of views. And for the first time, particularly, millennials and Gen Z were learning about the Federalist Society, Googling the Federalist Society, and finding out, the role they're playing in this takeover. So we're going to continue to shine a light on the Federalist Society and organize actions against them. And we'd love if you would join us in that. And we'll talk a little bit more about some other actions. Unfortunately, we'll take a minute to talk about Brett Kavanaugh, one of my least favorite topics. Very unfortunately, Justice Brett Kavanaugh, nominated, of course, 2 years ago under Trump. And we started the fight against him weeks before the credible allegations came out from Dr. Ford because we knew who he was already. We knew he had passed Trump's litmus test, which was going to be oppose the ACA. So we called up, all of our friends, all of the organizations that worked with us to save the ACA in Congress, asked everyone to head back to DC because the fight to save the ACA was now, sitting in this Supreme Court. Shout out, I think there's a number of people watching right now who threw down in a big way in this fight. We're just so thankful to everyone that came out, took endless 20-hour bus rides, slept on church floors, lived off free pizza, used your vacation days to come protest, put your, souls on the line, telling the stories of your surviving sexual abuse, and also putting your bodies on the line, engaging in civil disobedience. It was a really powerful fight. It's still a bit hard to talk about, but I will try to here. We really tried to use, an inside-outside game, right? We were taking over the Hart Atrium. We were storming the steps of the Supreme Court. We were marching in the streets, having lobbying meetings. We were doing phone banks. We were signing petitions. We were trying to use every tool in our activist toolbox to do everything we can to stop this nomination. Of course, that included bird dogging. We bird dogged for weeks. We talked to senators in the hallways and the elevators every day as they went into the hearings. Of course, you all probably know the one instance, one of my bosses, Anna Maria Archila and Maria Gallagher, confronting Jeff Flake in the elevator, which was just a really amazing moment and really showed the strength and the power of speaking truth to power. Because, moments later, Jeff Flake went to the committee and requested the FBI investigation. No credit to him. Of course, he lived up to his name and flaked and, voted to confirm Brett Kavanaugh. And of course, we all know that an FBI investigation unfortunately ended up to just be a complete sham. It was hindered throughout by Republicans. It had a ridiculous time frame. So unfortunately, it resulted in Kavanaugh being confirmed to the Supreme Court. But we have just enormous thanks to Dr. Ford for coming forward with her story and all the courage it took for her to fly across the country amidst death threats, come forward with this important information and testify in front of Congress. She actually wrote a really beautiful letter to CPD and the protesters saying that She felt better that day testifying, knowing that there were thousands of people there that believed her and had her back. So as painful as this loss was for all of us, and really felt just all across the country, there was some positive outcomes. We did impact the midterms. There's been many studies and many polls to suggest that these actions motivated people to vote, particularly millennials. People, said that the things that brought them to the polls were watching Kavanaugh during the hearings and then watching the protesters in DC in response. We also changed the narrative. When Kavanaugh was, first nominated, there was a lot of kind of mixed, really weird things being said, right? Like maybe he wasn't so bad. We were called just, crazy women. We were exaggerating who he was. But we really changed the narrative. By the time the process was over, his legitimacy on the bench was certainly put into question. And we can see that in, our hero and champion, Representative Ayanna Pressley, calling for his impeachment. So we'll hold that. I would love to talk to you about that more. And we can really see, we didn't want it to be true, but we have the receipts. We're not, wild women. We were right. We can see that in Kavanaugh's recent dissents. He's exactly who we thought he is, and he's certainly against Roe v. Wade, despite what Susan Collins promised. He's against, he wants to take away our healthcare. He wants to take away, freedoms for dreamers and everything else. He's exactly who we knew he was and why we were in DC in the first place. So somehow we're here once again, just 2 years later, trying to stop essentially Kavanaugh 2.0 from getting to the bench. Another just hyper-partisan, someone with extreme beliefs. There is some good news. There's a bit of a glimmer of hope. Since Kavanaugh, the movement around the courts has been growing. That we've been meeting, CPD and Demand Justice just ourselves, hundreds of you, thousands of you. Other groups have done the same, and we're much more ready for this fight than we were the last time around. Demand Justice and CPD are very committed to this fight, and we promise to do everything that we can to try to block this confirmation. So Chris talked a little bit about this in the beginning. I'm just kind of bump it up and just reiterate that there are lots of things that the Dems can do. There are lots of procedural tools that they can use. They didn't do them during Kavanaugh, and they're not saying for sure they're going to use them this time around. So they need to hear from you. I'm hearing a lot of people say, my senators are Dems, I don't know what to do. Call them. This is a very exaggerated, a very short timeline. Every day we delay is a win. We don't know what kind of little setback could be the win that brings us over and pushes this confirmation to happen past confirmation. So you should really call your Democratic senators and ask them to be a champion here, to step up and to do the right thing, particularly if your senator voted for one of these judges, which unfortunately many of them did. The other thing that's happening, it's this exaggerated timeline, and it's happening during a pandemic. The US just passed 200,000 people dead in this country. The Republicans somehow are saying they don't have the votes to pass a relief bill, but they can say for sure right now that they have the votes for a nominee that hasn't even been named. This is wild. This is in the next 30 some days between now and the election. We don't need them focused on this. We need them focused on bringing relief to, the millions of Americans suffering right now because of COVID. So if you have a Republican senator, call them and tell them that they need to get busy and solely focused on, bringing relief and COVID response. So we're going to talk about how to get involved. Like I said, the right has gotten away with just hijacking the Supreme Court. Progressives haven't done enough to fight back. We haven't built the kind of infrastructure or sustained focus that they've been able to achieve on the right. We have to educate ourselves. We have to get involved. And we're going to use a lot of the same tools that we used during Kavanaugh, but we need to get even more creative. But, we're going to phone bank. We're going to have lobbying meetings. We're going to make phone calls. We're going to, of course, bird dog and definitely do direct action. And we need all of you to play a role in all of those pieces. There's a lot to do in DC. And if you can come to DC, we'd love to have you. But just know there's so much to do at home. If you are staying in your state, there's just so many really important things. We'd love to help you set up lobbying meetings. We'd love you to set up actions. If you need to stay home because of COVID, like so many do, there are so many things you can do from your house. Like I said, we're organizing phone banks. The lobbying meetings are actually happening over Zoom. There's just a million different ways to get plugged in. We're having lots of calls regularly every week to keep everyone informed and to tell you what the call to action is that week and what the most important thing you can do that day is. The best way to get plugged in is to join our group Supreme Court Voter on Facebook. It's a community now of over 3,000 individuals committed to doing everything we absolutely can to stop this confirmation. But we're going to stay connected and stay together long past this fight because we're also committed to court reform. So we're coming up on time here. There's so much more we can say, but really just want to double down that we need you in this fight and we welcome you in this fight and that we hope that you can join us, if not in DC, fight with us from your home state in the coming weeks. I'll kick it back to you, Robert.
The only thing that I would add is that, we are in a sprint right now, but this is a marathon. And that no matter what happens in the next couple of months, we know that next year the fight will continue to fix the court, to restore balance to the courts, both the Supreme Court, but also the lower courts as well. And look forward to seeing you in that fight together.
I'm seeing some good questions. People want scripts, people want numbers. We'll email everyone that's joined this training. If you join the group, we have some scripts there. We have a dialer set up next week. If you want to call voters and encourage them to call their senators, we're going to have shifts for that too. So join the group and you'll get all the links and all the signups. We would really, really love your help. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining.
Coming from a different location, I wanted to say, because my phone's plugged in, this concludes our presentation for today. I hope you will attend the Grassroots North Shore event tomorrow. You can find a link to the event on Facebook. And if you have any questions, please feel free to write us at the dpwpc@outlook.com. We are glad to have had you, and thank you for coming. Have a good night.
Thank
and thank you for staying with us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.